conversation. So yeah, my name is Alden Morse. I head up partnerships for Faring. So I've been at Faring for a little over a year now. My background prior to joining Faring was actually more so in direct sales. So kind of way back when I worked for a small commerce startup that was ultimately acquired by Shopify called Handshake. So we essentially had like a B2B product that was very similar to Shopify's B2C offering. So was in commerce back starting in 2013. And then before Faring, I was at Segment. So if anyone's familiar with the customer data platform space, they're one of the leaders there. So pretty good background of e-commerce and also kind of data and analytics. So today I will kind of speak to how Faring plays in both of those spaces. And yeah, again, please feel free to jump in here with questions throughout. So to kick things off, today Faring party data of 100 direct to consumer brands. The vast majority, like 99% of those brands are on the Shopify platform, and the majority of those are Shopify Plus clients. You can see here, if you're familiar, it's really some of the largest and fastest growing brands in the space. Zero party data, just to kind of level set, is the industry term for direct from consumer data. So you might hear us use direct from consumer or zero party data. Essentially what this is, it's data that consumers are intentionally or proactively providing back to your brand or business. And what Faring offers, because it's data coming directly from your consumers, is essentially a new proprietary data source that enables you to better understand who your consumers are, where they're finding you from, what they like about the products, maybe what they don't. And ultimately, you can then leverage that data across your organization for a number of different use cases, which I will get into here in just a moment. So before diving into a bit more about the top use cases and a little more on how Faring works, I did have a question. Does anyone know what a Faring is? It looks like Matt might have a thought here.
Only because I work with Cassandra pretty closely, we were talking about earlier. And actually there is in the calendar link, a little one-sheeter about Faring, which was pretty cool to check out. But it looks like post-sale surveys.
So that's what our solution does, but I'm curious if anyone knows what an actual like Faring is. Sorry, I should have asked the question a lot clearer. Sorry about that.
Then
Put a couple hints up here on the screen. Got it.
Fins on the wings of a plane.
All right, Zach, that's pretty good. So a fairing is essentially an object or a mechanism that's added to something to make it more aerodynamic, right? So it's something that helps something be able to move faster, become more streamlined, and actually helps you leverage the friction you might be creating. So I don't know if anyone here is like a fan of F1, but when you see cars going into DRS mode when they're passing the other car, that's typically a fairing that's helping them get that additional speed to gain traction to actually get past. So reason why we're called Faring, which I'll share more about, is ultimately we're built to help direct-to-consumer brands be able to move faster and streamline their operations when it comes to leveraging all the consumer feedback data that they're actually collecting. So from a use case perspective, these are the top use cases we'll focus on today. Attribution is definitely number one. So a lot of our brands will ask questions like, how'd you hear about us? How'd you first hear about us? When did you first hear about us? To better and more accurately understand where consumers are actually finding them from a channel perspective. Personalization as well, right? So collecting more data about your consumers to figure out who they are, what are the top demographics, how can we market to them, how can we create more personalized campaigns downstream? And then of course, this concept of kind of always on strategy, right? Fundamentally, what Faring helps you do is just ask your entire consumer base questions at scale. And because on average, we see completion rates upwards of 35%, you're gonna get a lot of responses and a lot of data coming back from your consumers. Won't spend too much time on this, but what this is kind of meant to highlight here, some of our top customers, is that while Faring is a post-purchase survey solution, the data that we provide is what makes us so valuable, right? So fundamentally to brands and our agency partners, Faring becomes a reliable source of data that they're leveraging for all of those use cases I just touched on. Quickly to kind of level set, right? I think traditionally survey solutions are thought to be more legacy, kind of archaic, slower moving type solutions. And Faring is not that at all, right? So I usually will say, think of Faring as more of an always on data source of consumer feedback rather than a traditional survey tool, right? So we're collecting hundreds of thousands of responses every single day. Our data is able to be integrated and automated across your entire stack. So again, you can activate on this data in real time versus most survey solutions, you're typically just collecting data. That data lives in a spreadsheet and it requires someone to actually go in and make use of that information. So a little bit more on how Faring's question stream actually works, given I was just kind of speaking to how we're not a traditional survey solution. So with most surveys, right, when you land on a website and make a purchase, everyone is going to be asked the same questions every single time. With Faring, you're able to curate and ask targeted questions depending on who the consumer actually is, right? So if Zach were to go on Allbirds' website and buy a pair of shoes, and then Ryan did as well, depending on if Zach or Ryan might be a new or a returning customer, you can actually target and serve different questions at that user. You can also do things like only ask questions up until they're answered. Right, traditional survey tools kind of have this one-to-one interaction. I'm glad I guessed that, Zach. Most survey solutions kind of have this one-to-one interaction mindset, but really, like, you want to be having an ongoing conversation with these consumers, right? And so the idea behind Faring, as opposed to just peppering them with the same 5-7 questions every time, you'll set up your question stream in a way that you're asking unique questions every single time, again, depending on who the consumer is. And then what we're kind of highlighting downstream is how you can activate the data. I believe Klaviyo, right, is a solution that you all work with a fair amount. Ash, who I think heads up your CRO operations, I actually met her at a Klaviyo event last year, which is how we kind of all got connected to Smart Sites. And for Klaviyo, we've got probably over 1,000 brands now that will send response data into Klaviyo. And it could be something as fundamental as just, consistently updating a consumer's profile. Or you might be getting more advanced and actually creating targeted flows, more kind of unique segments based on the response data that you're capturing from a consumer. And to kind of give a example of what that looks like, Faring's supposed to feel like this for the consumer, right? So this is an example of, right, as a consumer is kind of telling you what they love most about your product. And then kind of based on that data point, then downstream, you could then add that consumer to a marketing campaign tied to that value prop. So I'm going to dive into the specific use cases, share a couple of customer examples, and then after that, we'll actually get into the platform. But now's a good place to kind of hit pause and just see if there's any initial questions, thoughts, or feedback here.
Yeah. I mean, so you can theoretically just export these audiences after they're selected and then leverage them on any platform of your choosing.
So from a audience standpoint, and I'll show you what it looks like. So you can export all of the responses out from Faring, and then we tie all of the responses to the individual transactions. So you'll have things like customer ID, customer email, coupon code, UTMs.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. As far as like the audiences themselves, the use case for that would be probably more so through a integration, right? So you still would be using Klaviyo to actually design the audiences, but the response data is what feeds into Klaviyo and enables you to kind of automatically add someone into a new audience. And the other kind of use case, I think that's important that we think about, direct to consumer. Well, I would argue every market and industry today is hyper competitive. Direct to consumer, maybe more so than any other industry. And chances are, like, your competitors are probably looking at the same third-party data and similar market and consumer research. So we very much believe that, like, your customers are kind of that competitive advantage for you. And so it's kind of a way to basically leverage that data directly from your consumers to create these unique targets and segments you might not have previously thought to actually go after.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Another really awesome use case we love is, like, we kind of call it the buyer versus the user problem, right? So, like, traditionally, direct-to-consumer companies look at, average order value and lifetime value, maybe just holistically. But what a lot of our brands will do is they'll ask questions like, who is this purchase for? And then you can segment out metrics for people who are actually buying the products for themselves versus someone who might be buying a product for someone else, right? So you get this whole new kind of data point and data set you can work with. And then from a marketing perspective, right, you obviously want to be marketing to a gift giver much differently than you would market to an actual user of your product. So just another use case to touch on from a Klaviyo and personalization standpoint. So here's kind of really when and kind of why to bring Faring to a client. So attribution kind of seems to be that ongoing, like, puzzle that no one can solve, and you're not really meant to solve it, but Faring can help you close the gap significantly. Is TikTok a channel that, like, either like you're helping your clients, or maybe that your clients are interested or looking more to invest in?
The latter, for sure. We have little experience, at least with paid TikTok advertising, and it is frequently asked if we can do it.
Got it. Got it. So TikTok, we actually have a partnership with them, which I can share more on. But essentially, we saw TikTok being like written in as you can see here as a response option, going back 2 years. And I think over that 2-year span, TikTok accounts for like 15% of all product discovery on our platform across all of our brands, which is like a pretty insane number how fast it's grown. So using the example of TikTok and where fairing comes in very handy, I myself am not a big TikToker, I have to admit, but I understand how the experience works, right? My wife always jokes she goes on the app and she watches videos for like an hour straight, right? And so maybe she saw like an ad on the second or third video, but you're typically not going to click on that and leave TikTok right then and there to go look at that brand. So maybe 2 hours later, maybe the next day, you go to Google, you type in Dr. Squatch as an example, and then most solutions, they're going to attribute that sale to, direct or unknown, or maybe to the Google search, when in actuality, TikTok is really what drove that consumer to make that purchase, right? And so by asking consumers at checkout, hey, how did you actually hear about us? That can just help you much more accurately and better understand how your investments are performing. And that's one of the reasons TikTok loves us. And with our partnership, essentially, we're able to offer any client advertising on TikTok that will share data up to a 5K ad credit, which we can talk more about later. Don't want to get too bogged down in that. But TikTok, we directly help brands understand it's performing much higher than even TikTok is able to report on. Right. And so like that's a scenario where they love us because we help brands understand it's much higher performing. So again, that's the TikTok example. It works very similar as well for YouTube. Podcast advertising. Not sure if that's something that like your clients are looking at, but for podcasts, like that literally is like that's offline data. How do you track that without the coupon code as an example? But by asking consumers at checkout, we can then figure out, hey, I heard about you on a podcast. And I actually think I just ran through my customer story beforehand. So this is also just showing you like an implementation example. So Dr. Squatch, one of our largest advertisers, what they've done is they've set up essentially like you could call it like a 2-step survey. So what they actually do is they ask, how'd you hear about Dr. Squatch? And then if someone says TikTok, they'll actually say like, where on TikTok did you see us? To figure out, was it on the feed? Was it a paid ad? Was it organic? Was it the page? And then some brands will also do more of a full page custom takeover. Majority of our brands go with our out-of-the-box implementation, which you can see gets about a 40 to 55% response rate. The custom full page takeover requires more resources, sort of, but you can see sometimes you're able to elicit a higher response rate. So that's everything on the attribution front. Personalization, obviously I shared a little bit on already. This is a very, very generic screenshot of our Klaviyo integration. But again, a number of our brands will ask questions like, which of these best describes you? How would you classify yourself? So you can better figure out, who are these consumers? You think about very like niche products as well. We have a customer that sells like a very tiny mobile Wi-Fi device, right? And they had an assumption that their number one demographic was professionals, contractors. And they found out actually their number one demographic was students, which makes a ton of sense, right? As students on the go, they want to have that Wi-Fi device with them. And when you uncover, hey, students are actually my highest market versus like the professionals, again, another good insight and potentially can inform, your creative or how you're actually going to market. This is a really good example actually of that kind of combined with the TikTok use case. So one of our clients, Brevity, they make like very high-end backpacks, think like photography, hiking, camping. And they very much believe their like top demographic were males. I think it was like age 30 to 35. I forget the specific range, but as a result, they were creating content on YouTube that they felt would connect right with that demographic. Through launching Question Stream and just simply asking, how'd you hear about us? They uncovered a totally untapped market, females 18 to 24, finding them on TikTok, right? And so not only now do they know they've got a whole other demographic they can market to, but going from creating content on YouTube to TikTok is obviously very different. So it's not just informing their demographics, but also their creative and how they're going to market with their content. And then this is an example of always on strategy. We're working on figuring out a more buzzwordy name than always on strategy. But again, as I talked about, fundamentally what you're doing with fairing is you're asking consumers questions at scale, and you're going to get a lot of data coming back. And so whatever you want to better know about your consumers or about your market, that's what you should ask, right? And so this is a very common question we'll see. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Vice Golf, but we're actually meeting with them this morning. They've been traditionally known as a golf ball company primarily, which I can attest to because I've lost maybe hundreds of them in the woods of New Jersey. But they're actually now pushing much further into the space for like apparel and also golf accessories, right? And so they know with golf balls, they compete with Titleist, with Callaway, Bridgestone, kind of the traditional players there. Apparel wise, the golf space is insane for new apparel companies, right? And so they can now ask this question to figure out these new consumers buying apparel, what brands maybe are we taking them from, to kind of uncover some other competitive insights, things of that nature. So this is our question bank. So if you're thinking, well, like for every use case, what questions should we ask, right? So we've got probably over 100 now of basically like templated, curated questions that we've seen perform at the highest level as far as response rates and pulling insights. So the idea here, right, is like if you ever want to provide more value to a client, we've got a ton of preloaded questions and templates that you can, offer to them as a potential solution. Obviously, you can engage with our team directly to make recommendations. But one of the things I'll share a bit more on is one of the benefits our agency partners really love about Fairing is that you can ask as many questions as you want, collect as many responses as you want without spending any more money with us, right? And so if you want to add or bring more value to a client, figure out what they want to understand better, put that question into your question stream and start to see the responses and all the data come flowing in from your consumers. I'm going to hit pause here. I'm going to kind of dive into this, which was more or less like a great insights chart from one of our partners within. I just went through a lot, and so I just want to hit pause to see if there's any kind of initial questions on some of the specific use cases I just highlighted. All right. Was there a question?
Oh, I was going to ask, are you going to share this deck, or can you share this deck with us after? Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I've tailored this. I will probably add a couple things in and strip a couple things out, but yeah, everyone will get this deck afterwards, essentially in the form I'm going through it. So this is to take you through. So this was actually something put together by one of our agency partners within agency. They're based out of Long Island City. So they've been in our program since last June. And they came to us with Playboy as their client that they wanted to try to leverage Fairing for. So this is a bit of a unique use case because Playboy is just more of like a legacy type brand than probably the majority of our customers are, right? When someone says, how'd you hear about Playboy? You got to really think hard and probably go way back when to the first time you heard about it. But anyway, what they wanted to leverage Fairing for was to basically prove to Playboy that even though they weren't maybe actively advertising on TikTok, they were pretty confident they were getting sales and consumers coming from that channel, right? And so their initial use case was specifically for attribution. They implemented Fairing. We did a 3-month proof of concept with the Within team and Playboy. And these were all of the additional insights that they were able to uncover in that 3-month period, right? So obviously they did better understand attribution and where consumers were finding them from, but also understanding, more or less like a conversion rate optimization use case, right? Understanding where are there gaps in our website, where are there gaps in the user experience we can maybe improve upon. Some of the competitive intel as well. They had said they never considered, like a Nike as an example as a competitor of theirs, but knowing that they had people kind of buying something from Playboy shop opposed to Nike, that kind of informs, hey, maybe we want to start to create products that move in that direction. And then I did probably tease this a little bit too early, but this metric around folks that are buying products for themselves versus for significant others, friends, colleagues, kids, whoever it may be. And then product development as well is a use case we're starting to see come up more and more. One of our brands called the Udi, their head of marketing essentially said, if you want to figure out how to innovate and what to build for your customers, who better to ask than your customers directly, right? So that goes back to what do you want to know? What do you want to understand better? Put that into question stream, and I think you'll be pretty surprised at the amount of data and responses you see coming back. From an implementation standpoint, we're turnkey on Shopify. So 5 minutes is actually on the long end. You can download us and get a question live in literally less than 60 seconds. And then from a implementation standpoint, it does not require any technical or engineering resources to implement Fairing on Shopify, export data, add new questions, which I'll show you in just a moment how easy it is to do. And then from a pricing perspective, it's very straightforward. Everyone starts on our 14-day free trial. A lot of our brands are actually able to find insights in like the first week or two, which is very exciting to get some ROI before you're even having to pay for the account. And then you get access to every feature, every integration, unlimited responses, unlimited questions with each of these packages. And if everyone's thinking, well, hey, what if I've got someone for 50,000 orders? We can create custom packages in between all of these levels. But the idea behind our pricing is, one, it's simple, but also two, it kind of incentivizes our agency partners and brands to use Fairing more and more versus having to think about, do I really want to ask this question because maybe I'll have to pay more money based on the data I get coming back, right? So to kind of summarize, and again, I'll send this over after the fact, but sort of from like a top, use case perspective for our agency partners, leveraging our data is like number one, the most valuable use case, right? So when you can actually get hands-on with the Fairing data and show it to your client to prove how certain spends are performing, or to help them create a unique, segment in their ESP, or to kind of get that always on strategy type insight around what competitors they might be switching from, or what other products they might be looking for. I did include a couple of examples here. So we did a full case study with Within and the Playboy team, so you can get a lot more insights into how they leveraged us, some more KPIs. Dalton James, actually from the Smart Sites team, recently put out a phenomenal guest post with us. So this is more not like Fairing specific, but more kind of generally how you can help your brands leverage zero-party data to build an effective email marketing strategy, which Fairing can obviously be a part of. Then as well, we have some use cases for creating custom reports and dashboards, question streams, survey audits, and optimizations. And then implementation, again, Shopify is pretty turnkey. So there's not a lot there yet from an agency use case perspective, but as we push into non-Shopify, so like Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Magento BigCommerce, there will be an opportunity for more kind of implementation focused agencies to be able to step in and help out there. So I guess I'm going to jump into the product. But I guess, now's, I think, probably a good time as well just to hit pause, see if there's any questions, thoughts before I jump in. All right, cool. So we're going to start, which is like very straightforward on the consumer view or side of things. So again, being turnkey on Shopify, Fairing injects and loads directly into the confirmation page, right? So it's very straightforward. As soon as the user checks out, it loads directly here on the confirmation page. And then again, the questions that are being served to the consumer are going to be targeted and curated based on how you're setting them up, which I'll show you how to do in just a moment. But again, it's wildly straightforward. We live right here on the confirmation page. So as soon as that user checks out, they'll be able to provide this data back to the brand. A couple of things to call out here, depending on how you've configured your question stream. Like let's say you had 4 or 5 questions set up and Alden only answered the first question and then dropped out of your question stream. Fairing is going to capture that initial response, record that for you, so you'll have that. So we will capture all the partial responses. And then when Alden comes back to place another order, the question asked would then be dictated based on how you've set up the actual stream. And you're probably thinking, what does that look like? How does that work? Which we'll jump over to in just a minute. But the idea is like no one knows they're taking a Fairing survey. It's very much meant to look and feel like the brand is directly asking these questions to the consumer to obviously collect data to then improve the user experience, understanding the channel spend, whatever the use cases might be. So to implement your questions, there's a couple of entry points into our product, right? So this is just going to be the back-end admin side of Fairing. So you can go ahead and just select new question. These are the 5 question types we have today. So single response, multi, open-ended, date, and net promoter score is a new one we've just released. What's also important to understand is that you can add follow-ups or clarifications, right, to all of these questions. So the example I think I used earlier was maybe you want to ask, how'd you hear about us? And then if someone says TikTok, add a follow-up to say, where on TikTok did you hear about us? Right? Or, was there a influencer that drove you to make a purchase today? If you say yes, they can then list out the influencers they're working with. Say no, skip them, move them on to the next question in the question stream. And then inside of the actual question configuration, that's where you will set up all the targeting rules you have for these questions, right? So every question is going to have its own set of rules. And so certain questions you probably want to ask to every customer. Some questions might make sense for just new customers versus returning, and some questions you want to ask like every time and some not, right? If someone's already told you how they heard about your brand for the first time, don't ask them that question every single time because it's a bad user experience and they might all of a sudden like forget and change their mind and now you've got bad data. But a question like how would you classify yourself or what drove you to purchase today, those are questions you might want to always ask because those could be updating or be different every single time a consumer is coming to actually make a purchase. And then you can see as well, it's actually not live in this account, unfortunately, but one of our new features is being able to target by product purchased, right? So based on literally a specific SKU being bought, you can target a unique question at that consumer. And then that concept is we're moving towards more or less like a full logic engine. The next targeting option is going to be based on total order value, right? So maybe a customer who's spending, upwards of $1,000, you want to like ask a specific question or maybe offer a promotion, like a loyalty thing too. And then for anyone not, you just maybe don't want to put them into that experience. So again, long-term where we're going is kind of based on whatever rhyme or reason, whatever logic you would want to leverage to ask, to target questions at consumers, you'll have the ability to do so. The other entry point into Question Stream is via our question bank. So I know I talked about that briefly in the deck, but this is just kind of bringing it to life. So again, think of these as more or less templated questions to help you get started faster and to also help you uncover some other use cases you might not be as familiar with, right? So like every brand for the most part will start using fairing for attribution. Some will look at CRO and personalization right away. Others don't want to boil the ocean, right? And then maybe after a couple of weeks and they feel more comfortable consuming fairing data, great place to go to come in to figure out what are some other questions you might want to ask, just to kind of show you like what it looks like. Very straightforward. We provide more or less the template. We do enable you to tweak it if you'd like. We typically encourage brands to not change the style of the question. They've been written with one of our advisors who is high up on the research team at Facebook and also Airbnb. So they're written in a very methodical way. But of course, you need to tailor the responses to whatever would make most sense, for the brand or the business. Zach, looks like you got a question.
Do you find that there's particular industries more so than others that really struggle, like e-commerce wise, that really struggle with attribution that you find coming to you looking for that service in particular?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So health and beauty is our number one industry. And I think a big part of the reason, like, I'm not saying other brands don't do it, but for health and beauty, I think they might use influencers as much or if not more than any other industry to like show off and market their products. Right. And so as an example, like, and they might be more on TikTok just because of the kind of product they are. So yeah, I definitely think like you see trends in industries like, we have a lot of food and beverage companies, but to be honest, they're probably more on the traditional channels like Meta, right, or Instagram. And then it's more of like the health and beauty, certainly fashion and apparel, they tend to be on sort of like the new and exciting channels. I don't know if you'd consider YouTube to be new and exciting still. But yeah, I think it's like very much like by industry, you see them investing in different channels. And a lot of it is basically how they're looking to market or communicate to their consumer base, right? So, and one of the new features we're actually working on, I forget the exact name of it, but it's essentially auto suggest, right? So one problem we have with the influencer use case is some brands might be working with upwards of 50 influencers at any given time, right? And you don't want to say which influencer and then literally just have to list out 50 different ones. That's not a good user experience. And so what the auto suggest functionality will do is if someone starts to type in, the first letter or two of someone's name, it will then start to recommend or suggest who that influencer could be so they can populate it much faster. And of course, the brand would dictate who their list of influencers are. So did that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. More so awesome. For influencers, TikTok, where it is a platform that just has general difficult, attribution, and health and beauty. That makes a lot of sense. I'm just, churning the wheels right now. Got a client that sells vegan ice cream, and coupon redemption is one of their primary objectives. And I feel like they could be a good fit. So that kind of leads me to my next question, and apologize if you've covered this. Any prerequisites to get started with, with fairing, like minimum revenue per month or Yeah.
So Yeah, so we typically say, there's really two reasons for it. Is usually you want to look for about 5 million in annual revenue as kind of the low end of the threshold. Reason being is when you look at our pricing model, right? Like our lowest subscription is 1,000 orders a month, right? So you kind of want to be processing close to that, but more importantly, just from like a value perspective, if you were only processing a couple hundred orders a month on your site, you're just not going to get enough responses to where the data is going to be all that valuable. But yeah, definitely want to be looking for 5 million and upwards. And then as far as like what signals or kind of what intent to look for, struggling with attribution is probably too generic, right? It's more like we want to uncover and invest in new channels that could be performing higher than we know. And then certainly anyone looking to kind of invest in omni-channel personalization is a good brand to look out for. But I think as well, like I guess vegan ice cream maybe isn't as niche as it would have been a couple of years ago, but that's another good example. Like to go back to your question, I think brands that have more niche or unique products as well are really, really good fits, right, for Fairing, because you want to make sure you really understand who your target market is. And also, if you have a unique, innovative product, you might need a little bit more feedback and more guidance from the market as to what's working, what's not, what else could we build. So that's definitely another good type of brand to be on the lookout for.
Thank you, Alvin.
Awesome, for sure. So another aspect to cover here would be our integrations. So we've got about 20 integrations built overall. So not all of them are listed here. These are basically all of our more or less turnkey integrations that just take a couple of clicks to get set up. Like with Klaviyo, you literally would just go in here, grab your API key, put that into Klaviyo, and you're live, able to send data in, literally just a couple of clicks. We do have some other integrations that have been built via our API by like other partners. So I just mentioned that if you are looking for an integration that you don't see here, reach out to me. We might already have it. We might, be actively building it, or if it's a Shopify client, Shopify Flow is always a very good example, or excuse me, a very good option. Shopify Flow more or less lets you build automations between Shopify applications when there is not a full integration available. Zendesk and Gorgeous are probably the two most popular solutions we see used through Shopify Flow and Fairing. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with those, but they're more or less help desk, chat desk solutions. So from like a CRO perspective, what brands will do is if a consumer lets them know something like your return policy was hard to find or a picture didn't display properly right on a product page, they can then take that response, send it into Gorgeous or Zendesk, create a product ticket automatically to expedite getting the remedy back, into their site. So, and then with the TikTok piece, given we actually have a fair amount of time left, would it be useful, Zach? I know you mentioned like that it might be interesting to talk more on, so I can just kind of share quickly a little bit more on the TikTok piece here. So I shared a little bit more around like the use case, right? Essentially, like we've directly helped brands better understand the value of TikTok, so they spend more on TikTok, which TikTok obviously loves. TikTok themselves, they want to create better reporting and attribution solutions for their advertisers. And actually long-term, what they want to do is feed the response data back into their platform to help optimize. So that's like the long-term vision for TikTok is they want to get data from brands to just like improve their whole experience. For now, though, they're basically just analyzing and studying the data that we're collecting. And so for any brand spending on TikTok, if they're willing to share data, they'd be eligible to receive an ad credit. So for any brand spending $10,000 or more on a weekly basis, they'd receive $5,000 in free ad credits from TikTok. Any brand spending less can still receive a credit. It would be up to $2,000 in ad spend. So for brands that are going to be spending, it's kind of a nice little incentive. The one thing I like to call out, just because sometimes everyone's like, hey, Alden, are you aware of what's going on with TikTok? Is this data secure? So what we did is we built this integration that creates a unique key that's specific to TikTok. Our competitor also has a partnership with them, but they share the entire account data. Whereas what we do is we create this unique API that only shares data from this one question that's specific to TikTok, right? So when TikTok pulls data from someone using this, they're only going to see the relevant responses to TikTok. So again, just kind of confirming and clarifying that the integration is very safe and secure from a data and privacy standpoint. Sorry to go
Yeah,
off on a little bit of a
like,
tangent there, but
if we can match up with like yearly revenue and then this product offering, it's going to be a win-win. It's like
yeah,
5,000
absolutely.
is a very generous just credit. Like 500 is typical for any advertising platform. So this is it's going to grab attention for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, and not to get like too salesy, and it does depend technically on the plan, but in some cases, like, you know,
Bro, get
this will pay
salesy.
for fairing, right? So this will pay for fairing, right? At least for, you know, like a couple months, potentially a year, 2 years, depending on the size of the plan you go with us. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, it's also just, you know, exciting just to kind of have that. And we're like, can't share too much, but like we're in early conversations with some of the other larger platform channels as well. So the kind of last thing here I wanted to cover would be our analytics. Then I'll just jump back in. I got one more slide to kind of run through, and then I'm happy to go through any Q&A and talk about some options for next steps. Okay, so analytics, right? So we do offer analytics for every single question right within the UI, right? So you can just kind of see at a high level what you're getting from a response perspective. If this, excuse me, was a real account, you'd see the dollar value tied to revenue, average order value. Really, though, where this gets exciting for our customers is, number one, we let you compare like the last click with the actual response, right? So you can see right off the bat like how different this is already, right? You're able to get, in some cases, almost a 180 on the consumer, depending on what their response might be. You can also export all the data out, right? So this just kind of shows all the other data that we're collecting along with the response. You can export this into a spreadsheet. What the majority of our brands, and I would say probably all of our agency partners, have done now, though, is they've built custom templates or custom reports in Google Sheets, and then they use our data sync extension to load the new responses in, right? So you just would come into your template, add the extension, drop your API key in. It then loads all the questions you have, right? So, you know, if you have a report for attribution as an example, you probably just want to load how'd you hear about us. This would load the responses. It'll take probably a few seconds. But again, like the idea here is you typically would have a pre-built report where you kind of have data from your attribution solution. Maybe you've got data from the channels themselves. Then you can bring the response data in to kind of pivot or look at it against what all the other channels or platforms might be reporting. And then one of the things I'm really excited for, I know our agency partners are excited for, is a new feature we have coming out, which is called Pivot Responses by Question. And that's pretty much exactly what it sounds like, right? As opposed to having to export all the data out and kind of massage and manually look at the data, pivoting responses by question allows you to, in the fairing UI, as an example, figure out, okay, all of my respondents that said they heard about us on TikTok, who are they buying the product for? Right? Or for everyone that responded, they saw us on YouTube, what competitor were they buying from previously? So it basically allows you to kind of understand, like, you know, kind of overlaps or just insights across all of your different questions. Again, one of the benefits of fairing today is that our questions are decoupled from one another, because that's what enables you to create the different rules. The downside is just when it comes to analyzing it, it requires a bit more manual work right now, but that's going to solve most of that. So. And I can share this as well because it's helpful for the team to have access to. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming. And yeah, if there was any particular feature down the line the team was excited about, you know, would be happy to kind of keep you in the loop from a beta access standpoint as well. So that's the majority of what I wanted to go through in the platform. You know, at a high level, like what you see is fairly straightforward, which is the idea. We want it to be easy and simple to activate new questions, to get data out, understand insights. Under the hood, obviously, there's like a lot more going on. But yeah, before I jump back over, just have 2 more slides to go through. We do have a lot of time left. So if there was like a feature or something anyone wanted to see in more detail, happy to jump back into that. You know, if there's any questions, happy to take those now.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could touch on the Triple Whale integration, if you have any information there.
Yeah, so for Triple Whale, it's a good call out. So with our integration for Triple Whale, essentially, and I'll be honest, it's fairly like straightforward. So what we do is we feed our response data into Triple Whale, and then they essentially match up the responses to like what their models are showing. And so it's more or less comparing what like their measurement solution is telling you. You can also, I believe with Triple Whale, right, you can load in like all the data from like the platforms themselves. And so it's more or less just a way to kind of compare what you're getting from the post-purchase survey responses to like what all of the technology things that you're relying on from a tracking perspective give to you. As an example, like for like Rockerbox, which is another attribution solution, Source Medium as well, they have pre-built models that our data feeds into, right? So they've already attached certain weights to fairing data. But I believe with Triple Whale, it's basically just like a feed where you can kind of look at and compare the direct from consumer results versus what like the technology solutions might actually be reporting on. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. But as far as like a setup, it's the same idea where it's just one click. So you come in here, grab your token, drop it in a Triple Whale, you'll see the data flow again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. For sure. All right, great. So, and again, I'm going to send this over so we don't have to go through, kind of everything in too much detail, but just from like a kind of key takeaway standpoint, I know I talked about like the top use cases. The way we look at it, right? Obviously, we believe it should be fairing, but whether it's fairing or not, brands need to be asking consumers questions at checkout. It's such a good opportunity to get good, valuable, useful data. And again, we believe like, your consumers and your customers are your most valuable data source. And it's a very good way to kind of leverage them to really like help them, but obviously at the same time, kind of improve your business. And again, I know we talked about some of these, but I think from like an agency standpoint, again, you're going to be able to bring and provide never had or seen before. Solution is very much meant to be, I think my computer, there we go, I'm back. The solution is very much meant to be like used and owned by non-technical folks, right? Which I think is massive, like generally, but particularly in today's landscape where engineering resources are usually very tight and can be very costly and expensive. Giving a solution to a product or a growth team that they can kind of fully own is, usually very, very beneficial. And then, again, you don't really have to spend more money with us to get more value. Our integrations create new opportunities. There's really a lot you can kind of do to get creative with fairing.